Hi, thanks for joining me for another edition of 15 Minutes with Father Greg. And thanks very much for submitting questions. Got some really great and interesting ones, and I do hope to get to them over the course of the next few weeks. Please be sure to take a moment and to like this video, and maybe even share it when you're finished watching it with family and friends. And also be sure that you're following and subscribing to all our social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, our Facebook page, and be sure to check out our parish website for the latest up-to-date information. Just a disclaimer before we get into today's content. It's a little bit more sensitive, a little heavier than we usually have discussed. I'll be talking about end-of-life questions and decision-making for medical purposes. So if you're watching with little ones right now, you might want to hit the pause button and revisit this later. Or if this is a sensitive topic because of something you're going through or a loved one is, again, you might want to hit that pause button and watch it at a later point. So there are a lot of fields of theology. There's biblical theology, the study of scripture. There's dogmatic theology, the teachings of the church. There's church law, canon law. There's also church history. One of the fields of Catholic theology is moral theology, which basically seeks to answer the question, how ought we live? What should we do? And so it takes the gospel, takes Jesus Christ and his teaching and the teaching of the church over 2,000 years and tries to answer those questions. And there are a lot of areas within moral theology. One of them, of course, is bioethics or medical ethics. And I got a lot of questions actually when COVID started because we were hearing a lot about ventilators and the great need that there was going to be, and people who unfortunately had to be placed on ventilators, some of whom were able to come off, others unfortunately passed away. So there was a lot of debate about who needs a ventilator, how do we choose, can a person choose not to have a ventilator, and all these other questions that arise. So I'm not going to exhaust all of these questions in the short time we have today. What I'd like to do is just go through some basic principles regarding Catholic bioethics. And I should also say, this is not my area of expertise. Priests and deacons assuredly study all the fields of theology extensively during their time in seminary, but then certain people are sent for further studies, and this was not the area of which I was sent for further studies. And the reality is, too, that medicine changes, and our capabilities change, our equipment changes. And because it changes so rapidly, sometimes it takes us a little while to play catch-up as to answering the questions, what should we do in this given situation? So again, this is not going to exhaust this entire field of study. Rather, it's just going to present some basic principles and also give you some further resources. So the first important concept to remember when it comes to Catholic moral theology is that we first base it on what is called natural law. Natural law is that, simply put, the way we are hardwired as human beings. Apart from whatever religion or language or culture or even time that we live in, there are certain things that we innately know as human beings, things that we recognize that we don't have to really even be taught, things that we should do and things that we shouldn't do. For example, in nearly every time and place and culture, people have recognized that it is wrong to kill another person. We also recognize that it's wrong to commit incest. That's just simply hardwired into us. Yes, there are exceptions, but they are very minor. The overwhelming majority of humanity in all times and places have recognized these and other things as simply being wrong. So even apart from God's revelation to us, and for us as Christians, of course, in its fullness in the incarnation, Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh, even apart from that, we can still instinctively know certain things are right and certain things are wrong. So that's kind of the basis for Catholic moral theology. What is the natural law? Then, of course, as Christians, we look to Jesus Christ and his teaching as revealed in the scriptures. And then the church, over 2,000 plus years, has taken that teaching and used it to address the questions of the day. And certainly in the past 100, 150 years, bioethics has developed and emerged as a serious part of moral theology, especially when we talk about end-of-life issues. Now, it's important for us to remember that the Catholic Church does not believe in what's called vitalism. That is, that life should be maintained at all costs, always and everywhere. No. For us as Christians, and really for all humanity, we recognize that there will be a time when all of us will go home to God. We don't know when that is or how that will happen. But for many people, it does happen in the context of some sort of medical intervention. A person being in a hospital or nursing home or hospice facility. Or a person is at home under medical care of a hospice nurse or a physician. And as we treat those who are ill, a lot of questions can arise. But we should say at the outset, our goal is reaching heaven. We know that this life is finite, that it will have an end. How we approach that end, yes, is important. But we can take comfort in knowing where we are headed to, and that, of course, is to be with God forever. So, another basic principle. When it comes to medical interventions, whether it's medicine or treatments or even devices that aid people with their health, there is what's called ordinary means and extraordinary means. Ordinary means must be reasonable and benefit a person without being overly burdensome or expensive or painful. They are basically reasonable steps that we can take to aid people and comfort them, especially when they are ill or injured. Extraordinary means, of course, would be things that include perhaps a surgery or a procedure or a treatment or the use of a medical device. And what's important to note is that ordinary means and extraordinary means are not always the same in every case for every person. We have to look at cases individually to see what are the particular circumstances so we can make these determinations. So, for example, the use of a defibrillator or a respirator in some cases might be ordinary. If a young person, say in his 20s or 30s, suffers a heart attack, it would be reasonable to use a defibrillator because there's a great chance that person will be able to survive that sudden sickness and overcome it. But a person who is 97, who has had multiple medical diagnoses, the prognosis is not all that optimistic, a person may refrain and choose not to have a defibrillator used. So again, we have to look at circumstances individually. We also have to remember that sometimes we do certain things in medicine knowing that while it's aimed for something good, something bad might possibly happen. There could be a side effect, and that side effect could be as serious as even death. We call this the principle of double effect. That is, doing something with the intent of good, but realizing the risk that something bad might happen. So a procedure or a medication or treatment for one ailment may lead to something worse. Now, this is really important because the church has consistently held, and still does very firmly, that euthanasia is never permissible. Euthanasia is the direct intervention meant to end someone's life, and that is never acceptable. As Catholics, we believe in preserving and promoting the dignity of all life from the moment of conception through natural death. Now, euthanasia is specifically doing something that will result in ending someone's life on purpose. However, that's different than withholding further treatments or medicines and allowing nature to take its course. Again, if a person who is very elderly and very sick and has been for many, many years and the prognosis is not optimistic, that person or his or her family may choose to cease medical interventions and allow nature to take its course. That's different than actively putting drugs into someone or withholding certain things so that the person dies immediately. Very different. So, what are some best practices? Well, it's important for people to simply talk with family and close friends to make known what are your wishes, what are the extent to which you want interventions to keep you alive should you become incapacitated. There are things like advanced health directives which will give people instructions as to your wishes. It's also a good idea to have a healthcare proxy or a living will, and again, to make sure those around you, those closest to you, spouses, children, parents, very close family and friends, let them know what it is you wish. Again, I'm not going to exhaust all the different questions we have here, but I will direct you to the National Catholic Bioethics Center. There's a link below this video. You can check it out. It has a lot more detailed information and has some example forms of these forms that I've mentioned before, the advanced directives and a healthcare proxy and such, that you and your family might want to consider. Other people have asked about organ donation. Does the church permit Catholics to donate their organs after they are deceased? And the answer is yes, it is acceptable for someone to make that donation. And we should be sure that if we haven't made our wishes known directly, that there's a spot on our driver's license as well as in hospitals. They'll ask if that's something you're interested in. That's perfectly fine and reasonable. Someone also asked about donating one's body to science for medical experiments and testing. Now, interestingly, in my 11 years as a priest, twice I've done the funeral for someone months after he died because he had donated his body to science. The church does not stand opposed to this, but there are some important caveats. First is, we need to make sure that if we are going to make that very noble gift of our body after our death to an institution for further study, that we confirm that institution's practices are in conformity with the Catholic Church's ethics. We have to investigate and ensure that what we're doing is morally permissible according to our Catholic understanding of bioethics. And secondly, we should also ensure that the body is returned to its family so that a funeral can be celebrated and a permanent interment, that is in a cemetery, can take place. So again, remember this: the goal of our life is heaven. How we live on earth has great effects all the way into eternity. And how we approach that moment of passing from this life to the next will vary for each one of us. These questions are tough and hard and sometimes very painful for people to make. But we have our mother and teacher, the church, with us. So if you have more questions, please speak to your local parish priest. If you or a loved one are part of an institution, or if you have someone in a nursing home or in a hospital, ask to speak to the Catholic chaplain who is there. Search out for more information, because these are important decisions and we need to make them in the light of the gospel. So thanks very much for joining me for this session. Be sure to like this video and share it with those you think might be interested. And of course, feel free to submit any questions that you have by following the Google link doc below in this video, and I'll be happy to get to them as soon as I possibly can. Thanks so much. God bless you. Stay safe and stay healthy.